Every single year, a group of young men and women walks through the gates of one of the most demanding military training institutions on Earth. They are fit, they are motivated, they have spent months, sometimes years, preparing for this moment. They have run thousands of miles, studied leadership theory, memorized regulations, and convinced themselves that they are ready. And then the program begins. And within days, sometimes within hours, the reality of what they signed up for starts to hit them like a wall of cold concrete. By the time the final week arrives, more than half of the people who started are gone, not dismissed for failure, not injured beyond recovery, gone because they chose to leave. They looked at what was being asked of them and made a decision that most people would honestly understand. They quit, and the ones who are left, the ones who stayed through every breaking point, every sleepless night, every moment where their body and mind were screaming at them to stop, those are the ones the military was looking for the entire time. Today we are going deep inside the world of military officer training, specifically the programs designed not just to train leaders, but to find them. The schools where the dropout rate is not a sign of failure in the system, but proof that the system is working exactly as intended. Where the instructors are not trying to teach you to survive, they are trying to find out if you already have what it takes. And what you are going to discover about what happens inside those walls will completely change the way you think about leadership, pressure, and what human beings are actually capable of when everything is stripped away. Before we go any further, take a second right now to subscribe. Over 98% of the people watching this video have not subscribed yet. It costs you absolutely nothing. But if you are someone who respects what it means to earn something the hard way, this is the kind of content you are going to want to see every single time we put it out. Hit subscribe now, and let's get into this. The idea of a military school where more than half the candidates quit sounds dramatic when you say it out loud. But when you understand the history behind these programs, when you understand why they were designed the way they were, and what the military learned through decades of painful experience about what kind of person actually performs under extreme conditions, the dropout rate stops being the headline. The dropout rate becomes the point. Let's start from the beginning, because to understand why these programs exist, you need to understand what happens when militaries put unqualified leaders in charge of other people's lives. Throughout military history, one of the most consistent and devastating lessons has been this: technical competence is not the same as leadership ability. A person can be an extraordinary pilot, a gifted engineer, a brilliant strategist in a classroom. And then, the moment real pressure arrives, the moment the mission goes sideways, the moment the team is exhausted and resources are thin, and the right answer is not clear, that same person can completely fall apart. And when a leader falls apart, the people beneath them pay the price. Sometimes with their careers, sometimes with their lives. The military spent generations trying to solve this problem through smarter testing, better interviews, longer training pipelines, and every single time, they kept running into the same wall. You cannot fully predict how a person will perform under genuine, sustained, high-stakes pressure by watching them in a controlled environment. The only way to actually find out is to put them under that pressure and see what happens. That is the foundational logic behind every high-attrition officer training program that has ever existed. You do not build the pressure to eliminate people. You build the pressure because it is the only reliable way to see the truth about who someone actually is, when the comfort, the sleep, the food, the encouragement, and the easy options are all taken away at the same time. Officer Candidate School, which the U.S. military runs in different forms across each branch, is the primary gateway into commissioned military leadership. This is where civilians become officers, where enlisted personnel who have earned the opportunity to move into leadership roles make that transition, where the military's future commanders begin, and the programs are intentionally, deliberately, and unapologetically designed to make a significant portion of candidates choose to leave. Let's talk about what that actually looks like. Because the experience of walking into Officer Candidate School and what happens in those first 72 hours is something that most people cannot fully imagine until they have been through it. You arrive with your bags. You have a haircut you prepared for. You have the physical fitness scores you worked to build. You show up with a mental image of what this experience is going to be like, built from movies, from other people's stories, from whatever research you managed to do. And within the first hour, almost all of that mental image is replaced by a reality that is sharper, louder, faster, and more relentless than anything you pictured. The first thing that happens in virtually every high-attrition officer program is the systematic removal of individual identity. Your clothes are taken, your personal items are stored or sent home. Your name disappears. You become a candidate, a number, a unit. Your hair is cut to a uniform length. Everyone around you looks the same, and from that moment forward, your individual preferences, your individual schedule, your individual comfort, none of it matters. What matters is the mission, the team, and the standard. This is not done to humiliate people. It is done because the military has learned that individual identity, when it is overly strong, becomes an obstacle to team function under stress. When a leader in a crisis starts making decisions based on personal comfort or personal pride, people get hurt. The stripping away of individual markers at the beginning of training is the first lesson the program teaches, often without saying a single word about it directly. You are not here as an individual. You are here as part of something larger than yourself. And the sooner you internalize that, the better. The sleep deprivation begins almost immediately. In many programs, candidates in the first phase receive as little as 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night, sometimes less. The training day starts in the hours before dawn and continues well past dark. Physical training sessions are scheduled at times that maximize discomfort, not because the instructors are sadistic, but because the military operates around the clock. Decisions in combat do not pause because a leader is tired. A carrier pilot does not get to decline a night landing because they have not slept well. A platoon leader does not get to delay a reaction to enemy contact because they need rest. The early sleep deprivation in training is a controlled introduction to a reality that every military officer will face repeatedly throughout their career. And here is what makes the sleep deprivation particularly powerful as a training and evaluation tool. A person's true character emerges when they are exhausted, when you are running on 4 hours of sleep for the third consecutive day, when your muscles ache, when your patience is gone, when the easy version of yourself has completely burned off. What is left is who you actually are. Are you still making decisions carefully? Are you still taking care of the people around you? Are you still showing up with integrity when no one would blame you for cutting a corner? Or are you snapping at teammates, cutting corners on safety, and privately planning your exit? The instructors in these programs are watching for exactly that. They have been through it themselves. They know what exhaustion looks like. They know the difference between a candidate who is struggling but still fundamentally present and a candidate who is already mentally checked out. And they know that the person who manages to hold on to their standards at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 5th day of minimal sleep is someone worth betting on. The physical demands of officer training are well documented and in many ways are what most people think of when they picture these programs. Long runs, obstacle courses, timed events, logs carried by teams across sand or mud, swimming in cold water, push-ups until the ground feels like a familiar friend. And yes, all of that is real. The physical demands are serious, deliberate, and progressive. But here is something that surprises most people who have not been through this type of training. The physical events are rarely what breaks candidates. The physical standards required to enter most officer programs can be met by any reasonably fit and motivated person who prepares properly. The physical training within the program is intense, but it is not at the edge of human biological possibility. It is hard. It is genuinely hard. But most of the people walking through those gates on day one have the physical capability to complete it. What they often do not have is the mental framework to contextualize the suffering correctly. When a person is running their 5th mile at 5 o'clock in the morning with wet boots and 3 hours of sleep, and an instructor who has not said a single encouraging word in 3 days, the physical discomfort is almost secondary to the mental battle happening inside their own head. The body is often still capable of moving forward. The mind has started asking whether moving forward is worth it, and that is precisely where the attrition actually happens. The military term for this is voluntary withdrawal. In many programs, at any point during training, a candidate can approach an instructor and state their intention to leave. No one chains anyone to a wall. No one is physically prevented from making the choice to go. The door is always open, and that open door is not a design flaw. It is another layer of the evaluation itself. Because what the military has learned is that a leader who stays in a dangerous situation, not because they genuinely believe in the mission, but because they feel trapped or because they are afraid to admit they want to leave, that leader is a liability. They will make decisions colored by their desire to exit. They will hesitate at the wrong moments. They will let the team down when it matters most, because their heart was never fully in it. The voluntary withdrawal process ensures that the people who finish did not finish because they had no other option. They finished because they chose to, again and again, at every single moment when leaving was available and legal and understandable, and no one would have genuinely blamed them for taking it. That repeated choice, in the face of every reason to stop, is what the program is actually measuring. Now let's talk about the specific environments where this plays out. Because while every branch of the American military runs its own officer training program, and while there are international equivalents at the highest levels in militaries around the world, there are certain programs that have become almost legendary for their attrition rates, their culture, and the specific way they approach the challenge of finding genuine leaders. The United States Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, located in Quantico, Virginia, is one of the most well-known examples in the American military context. The Marine Corps has an institutional identity built around the idea that not everyone can be a Marine, and that the standard must be defended aggressively. OCS Quantico is not a training program in the traditional sense. It is an evaluation program. The distinction matters enormously. A training program assumes you can build the necessary qualities into a person through instruction and practice. An evaluation program assumes those qualities either exist in a person or they do not, and the program's job is to find out which one is true. The Marine Corps has historically positioned OCS on the evaluation side of that line. The staff at Quantico is not primarily there to teach you how to be a Marine officer. They are there to determine whether you already have what it takes. The teaching comes later, at the basic school, after you have already proven you belong. This distinction changes everything about how the program feels from the inside. In a training program, there is a sense that the instructors want you to succeed, that they are invested in your improvement, that the challenge is a vehicle for development. In an evaluation program like OCS Quantico, the emotional experience is quite different. The instructors are professional, demanding, and relentlessly focused on the standard. They are not cold or indifferent, but their job is not to pull you through. Their job is to watch you pull yourself through, or not. The attrition rate at Marine OCS varies by class and by year, but the program has historically seen a meaningful percentage of candidates choose not to complete. The exact numbers shift based on recruiting cycles, seasonal conditions, and the specific composition of each class, but the culture of the program has never wavered. The standard does not lower because a class is struggling. The standard does not lower because attrition is high. The standard exists for a reason. And that reason is that Marine officers are eventually going to stand in front of infantry Marines, look them in the eye, and ask them to do extraordinarily difficult and dangerous things. The officer needs to be worthy of that ask. OCS is where that worthiness is tested for the first time. But OCS is not the ceiling of challenge in the officer development world. There are programs above it. Programs that take already commissioned officers and subject them to an entirely different and more sophisticated level of evaluation. Ranger School, run by the United States Army at Fort Benning and locations in Florida and the mountains of northern Georgia, is perhaps the most famous of these programs in American military culture. It is not exclusively for officers, but officers attending Ranger School are held to specific expectations about their performance that make the experience distinctive for them. The program runs approximately 61 days across 3 phases, each one designed to test leadership under progressively more difficult environmental and operational conditions. The pass rate for Ranger School over the years has generally hovered somewhere between roughly 40 and 50% of those who begin the course, though recycling through failed phases complicates the exact calculation. The point is clear. A significant portion of the people who start Ranger School do not finish it, at least not in a single attempt. Ranger School does something that OCS does not in quite the same way. It forces officers to lead real tactical situations while genuinely sleep-deprived and calorically deficient. The food allowance in Ranger School is deliberately kept well below what a normal person engaged in heavy physical activity would need. Candidates are frequently operating on fewer than 1,000 calories a day while conducting patrols, running leadership exercises, and navigating difficult terrain for hours at a time. The caloric deficit combined with the sleep deprivation and the operational tempo creates a physiological state that is genuinely close to what soldiers experience in sustained combat operations. And in that state, the program watches who leads and who doesn't. The leadership evaluation in Ranger School is continuous and formalized. Every candidate rotates through leadership positions throughout the course. Every time you are put in charge, you are graded by your peers, your instructors, and the situation itself. You can be tactically competent and still fail because your team did not follow you effectively. You can be physically dominant and still fail because you made a decision that got your simulated element compromised. The multi-dimensional nature of the evaluation is the point. Ranger School is not looking for the fittest person or the smartest person. It is looking for the person who can make the team effective when everything is objectively terrible. And then there is the program that sits at the absolute outer edge of what any Western military formally asks of its officers in peacetime training. Sierra School is one example: survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. A program so deliberately designed around psychological pressure that its specific details are classified. But the framework is known. Candidates are subjected to conditions that simulate capture and interrogation. They are placed in scenarios where compliance and resistance are both tested simultaneously. The psychological demands are in a category entirely different from physical exhaustion or tactical stress. Sierra School is about something deeper. It is about finding out what a person does when they have genuinely lost control of their external environment, and the only thing they have left is themselves. The international equivalents of these programs add another dimension to the story. The British Army's Special Forces selection process, while technically not an officer school in the traditional sense, draws candidates from the officer and enlisted ranks and subjects them to a process that has become a benchmark for high attrition selection worldwide. The British SAS selection, conducted in part in the Brecon Beacons in Wales, is famous for its brutal simplicity: long distances, heavy weight, terrible weather, and a selection staff that tells candidates almost nothing about how they are performing. The uncertainty is a feature, not a bug. If you need constant feedback and reassurance to keep moving, you are not the right person for the job they are offering. The selection passes roughly 10 to 20% of those who attempt it, depending on the cycle and the conditions. The French Foreign Legion's officer training program carries its own legendary reputation. The Legion itself attracts candidates from dozens of countries, people who are often running toward a new identity and a new life through one of the most demanding military cultures on Earth. The officer pathway within the Legion is a specific and demanding track that carries the Legion's institutional culture of extreme physical and mental discipline into the leadership development context. The attrition within Legion officer training is consistent with the institution's philosophy. Not everyone who wants to be here belongs here, and the only way to determine who belongs is to keep raising the standard until the people who do not belong make that determination themselves. The Royal Marine Commando training in the United Kingdom is another example that deserves specific attention. The Royal Marines run one of the longest initial officer training programs in any Western military, and the commando course that all Royal Marine officers must complete alongside their enlisted counterparts is a physical and leadership evaluation that has maintained a consistent dropout rate for decades. The shared training environment, where officers and enlisted personnel complete the same physical tests to the same standard, is a deliberate philosophical choice. It says something fundamental about the Royal Marine culture. The officer does not get an easier path to the badge. The officer earns it the same way everyone else does, and the team knows it. Now let's come back to the American context, because there is a specific dimension of officer training that gets less attention than the physical drama, but may be more important in understanding why the attrition rates are what they are. And that dimension is peer evaluation. In most military officer training programs, the candidates themselves play a formal role in evaluating each other. This is not an informal social process. It is a structured, recorded, and weighted component of each candidate's overall assessment. Throughout the program, you are asked to rank the people around you. Who do you trust? Who would you follow into a dangerous situation? Who shows leadership when no one is watching? Who cuts corners, blames others, and fails to take care of the team? The peer evaluation system is powerful for several reasons. First, it is very difficult to fake your way through 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in front of the same group of people for weeks at a time. You might be able to perform well in front of instructors during formal evaluations, but the person sleeping in the rack next to you knows things about you that no instructor can observe. They know how you behave when you think no one important is watching. They know whether you shared your rations when someone else came up short. They know whether you stayed up an extra hour to help a teammate who was struggling with a navigation exercise. They know whether you threw someone under the bus when an instructor was looking for accountability. The peer evaluation captures the informal reality of your character in a way that formal grading cannot. Second, the peer evaluation forces every candidate to practice a skill that is absolutely essential to military leadership: making judgments about other people's performance and communicating those judgments clearly, honestly, and constructively. That is hard. It is genuinely emotionally difficult to tell a teammate who has become a friend that you do not think they are performing at the standard. It is uncomfortable to be the person in the room who says the honest thing rather than the kind thing, but military leaders have to make those calls every single day. The peer evaluation process in officer training is one of the first places where candidates either develop that skill or fail to develop it. And the people who consistently receive low peer evaluations from their teammates face a reality check that is often more personally confronting than any physical evolution could be. It is one thing to be told by an instructor that your performance was insufficient. It is something entirely different to learn that the people who have been living and suffering alongside you do not trust you to lead them. This brings us to one of the most interesting psychological dynamics in any high-attrition training program: the relationship between candidates who complete the course and candidates who do not. Because contrary to what popular culture often implies, the people who quit military officer training are not typically weak people or bad people. Many of them are extremely capable, physically fit, technically smart individuals who discovered something real and important about themselves during the program. They discovered that the specific combination of qualities required to thrive in military leadership, the deep comfort with sustained discomfort, the instinctive orientation toward the team over the self, the ability to make clear decisions in genuine fog and fatigue, the willingness to carry responsibility without recognition, that combination is genuinely rare. And discovering that you do not have it in the particular form the military requires is not a failure of character. It is an honest self-assessment that takes its own kind of courage. The people who complete these programs sometimes feel a temptation to view those who left with contempt. The culture of some programs can encourage this, but the most thoughtful graduates typically describe a more nuanced view. They acknowledge that the people who voluntarily withdrew made an honest choice. And that honesty, while it led them out of the military pipeline, is itself a form of integrity. What the military does not want is a person who knows in their heart they do not belong in a leadership role, but stays anyway, because they cannot face the alternative. That person is dangerous. The person who knows themselves well enough to recognize the mismatch and makes the adult decision to acknowledge it is, in a strange way, demonstrating the kind of self-awareness that leadership requires, just not in the direction the program was hoping for. The ones who finish tell a different story, though. And it is worth spending real time on what the experience of completion feels like and what it does to a person. Graduates of high-attrition officer programs consistently describe the experience as the most transformative of their professional lives. Not because of what they were taught, but because of what they discovered. They discovered a version of themselves they did not know existed. They found out that they could keep going when every rational signal was telling them to stop. They found out that they could carry other people when they had nothing left for themselves. They found out that the suffering they were most afraid of was survivable, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. This discovery is not trivial. It is not a small thing that fades after graduation. It becomes a permanent internal reference point. Every hard thing that comes afterward gets measured against what they already know they have survived. A difficult conversation with a senior officer, a mission that goes sideways in ways that were not planned for, a deployment that stretches longer than expected, a period of professional uncertainty that would have been paralyzing before. All of it gets evaluated through the lens of someone who already knows what they look like at the absolute edge of their capacity, and who knows that at that edge they chose to keep going. That internal reference point is, in many ways, the most valuable thing any of these programs produce. More valuable than any tactical skill, any leadership theory, any regulatory knowledge. The certainty, rooted in actual experience, that you have already been tested at a level most people will never face, and you came through. That certainty changes how a person leads. It changes how they handle crisis. It changes how they communicate under pressure, and perhaps most importantly, it changes how they relate to the people they are responsible for, because they have genuinely stood where those people are standing. They know the weight of what they are asking others to carry, and they know it not from theory, but from memory. Let's talk about what the data actually says about why people leave these programs, because the reasons are more varied and more interesting than most people assume. The most common narrative is that people quit because the physical demands are too great, and physical burnout is certainly a real factor. Injuries, genuine medical issues, the accumulation of sleep deprivation beyond what any individual body can compensate for. These are real reasons that lead real candidates to leave programs. But when researchers and military psychologists have studied attrition in high-pressure officer training, the physical explanation consistently comes up short as the primary driver. The more consistent finding is that attrition is primarily mental, and specifically that it is driven by a failure to find meaning in the suffering. That phrase deserves some unpacking, because it is probably the most important insight into understanding what these programs actually test. When a candidate is in genuine pain, genuinely exhausted, genuinely uncertain about whether they can continue, the question that determines whether they keep going is not a physical one. It is not about whether their body can take one more step. Most of the time, biologically, it can. The question is whether they have a reason that is big enough to make the pain worth it, whether the thing they are moving toward means enough to justify the cost of continuing to pay. The candidates who complete these programs are not necessarily the ones who feel the least pain. Often, they feel as much as the ones who leave. They are the ones who have a reason, clear enough and strong enough, to keep paying. They want to serve at a level that matters. They feel an obligation to something larger than themselves. They cannot imagine living with the knowledge that they chose comfort over the standard. Whatever their specific internal version of the answer is, they have one, and it is big enough. The candidates who leave often cannot find that answer clearly enough in the critical moments. They are in pain, they are exhausted, they can see the door, and the thing on the other side of the door is not clear enough or important enough to make the difference. So they walk through it. And the program does not try to stop them, because if you need the program to convince you to stay, the program has already learned what it needed to know. The instructors in these programs, the men and women who run the evaluations and conduct the training, are a fascinating group in their own right. Their job is one of the most demanding in military education, and it requires a particular and somewhat counterintuitive set of skills. They need to apply genuine, sustained pressure without crossing into abuse. They need to observe clearly without interfering. They need to maintain standards without making them arbitrary. They need to be genuinely hard people, with genuinely good judgment about when hardness has served its purpose. The instructors at most high attrition officer programs are chosen from the pool of people who have already been through the experience themselves and performed exceptionally. They are not just putting on a performance. They have been exactly where the candidates are standing, and in many cases, that history gives them a level of insight into candidate performance that no external observer could replicate. They recognize the specific look of someone who is genuinely struggling but fundamentally present. They recognize the different look of someone who has already mentally departed. They know the difference between a candidate who needs one more moment of genuine adversity to break through to a new level of themselves, and a candidate who would benefit more from an honest conversation about whether this path is right for them. The best instructors in these programs are not the loudest or the most intimidating. They are the most observant. They see things that candidates do not realize they are showing, and they make recommendations about candidate performance that carry real weight in the final evaluation process. There is also a dimension of these programs that rarely gets discussed publicly, and that is what they do to the people who complete them in ways that create challenges later in their careers and their lives. The same intensity that builds extraordinary capacity in certain areas can create rigidity in others. Officers who emerge from extremely high-pressure training programs sometimes struggle to relate to colleagues who have not had the same experience. They can develop a binary view of toughness and weakness that does not serve them well in complex leadership environments, where the right answer is not always the hardest option. They can carry trauma responses from genuinely traumatic training experiences that affect their personal relationships in ways that take years to fully understand. The military has become increasingly aware of this dimension and has worked to build psychological support structures around these programs. Not to soften them, but to ensure that the development they produce is sustainable and healthy in the long run. A person who survives an extreme training program and carries invisible damage into their career and their family is not a success story just because they made it through. The complete version of success requires that the capability gained in the program translates into genuine effectiveness over the long arc of a military career and a human life. Let's talk about some of the specific moments inside these programs that candidates consistently identify as the turning points. The moments that determine, for each individual, whether they are going to make it. Almost every graduate of a high attrition program can identify a specific night, a specific evolution, a specific conversation with themselves in a moment of genuine crisis where the decision was made. The decision was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was just a quiet internal moment where the candidate stopped thinking about whether to continue and started only thinking about what to do next. The mental shift from "should I stay" to "what do I do next" is, for many people, the actual moment they cross the line from candidate to officer. Not the graduation, not the commission, that quiet moment in the dark where they stopped negotiating with the hardness and just kept moving. The logs are a famous example in programs that use them. Carrying a large, heavy log with a team for extended periods is a staple of several high-attrition programs. It is uncomfortable in a way that is hard to describe to someone who has not experienced it. The wood digs into your shoulders, your hands cramp around it, your team needs to move in coordination, or the log becomes even harder to manage. There is no way to make the log lighter. There is no clever strategy that eliminates the pain. You either carry it or you do not. And the teams that perform best are the ones that stop trying to manage the pain individually and start functioning as a single unit. The candidate who stops counting down the time and starts counting on the person next to them changes the dynamic for the whole team, and the instructors notice. The swim evolutions in programs that include water are similarly clarifying. Cold water has a way of stripping everything away very quickly. When your body is genuinely cold, when the temperature is pulling at your focus and your resolve, the mental tools that work fine on land start to feel much less reliable. The candidates who manage cold water well are not always the strongest swimmers. They are often the ones who have learned to control their breathing, their attention, and their emotional state in a way that the cold cannot disrupt. That ability to self-regulate under physiological stress is one of the clearest indicators of future performance under operational pressure. And the programs that use water as a training medium have learned this over decades of observation. The land navigation exercises, particularly the ones conducted at night in unfamiliar terrain, test something different. They test whether a candidate can maintain decision-making quality when they are genuinely uncertain about where they are, what the right direction is, and whether they have the time to figure it out before the standard window closes. Military leaders operate in uncertainty constantly. The fog of war is not a metaphor. It is a daily operational reality. The land navigation exercise in training is one of the earliest and most direct simulations of that fog, and the candidates who perform best are not always the ones with the best natural sense of direction. They are the ones who have a system for making good decisions with incomplete information, and who trust that system even when the uncertainty is uncomfortable. There is a specific leadership scenario that appears in some form across nearly every high-attrition officer program. It usually involves a small team, an artificially constrained set of resources, a time limit, and a task that is physically possible, but only barely, and only if the team coordinates effectively. The candidate in the leadership position has to make real decisions under real-time pressure. They have to communicate those decisions clearly. They have to adapt when the situation changes, and they have to bring the team through it without losing cohesion. The instructors watch everything. The peer evaluations cover everything, and the candidates who perform well in these exercises are the ones who understand something that seems simple but is genuinely rare in practice. The leader's job is not to have all the answers. The leader's job is to create the conditions in which the team can find the answers. The candidate who stands in the middle of a leadership exercise trying to personally solve every problem is a candidate who has not yet understood what leadership actually is. The candidate who reads the situation, assigns the right task to the right person, keeps the energy focused, and communicates the purpose clearly while staying calm, is showing the instructors exactly the person they have been looking for. The nights before graduation in these programs carry a specific emotional weight, because by the time you are close enough to the end to see it, you have already been through enough that the proximity of completion creates its own new form of pressure. Candidates who make it to the final phase of high-attrition programs describe a kind of heightened alertness. They have come too far to allow a mistake now. They know that the evaluation never fully stops until they have crossed the finish line, and they know that the instructors know this too, and that the final phases of the program often include some of the most demanding evaluations precisely because of it. The home stretch in these programs is not a coast. It is another test specifically designed to ensure that the pressure never fully releases until the decision has been made. You made it. Here is the badge. Here is the tab. Here is the commission. Now go lead. The graduation ceremonies from high-attrition officer programs are among the most emotionally significant moments in military culture, because everyone in the room knows what the credential in that moment represents. The families who attend these graduations often describe watching their son or daughter walk across that stage as one of the most overwhelming moments of their lives. Not because of the uniform or the ceremony, but because of what they know their person went through to get there. And the graduates themselves typically describe a feeling that is different from anything they expected. Not relief, exactly. Not pride, exactly. Something more complicated. A kind of quiet, settled certainty. A knowledge of themselves that they did not have before and will carry for the rest of their lives. The retention rates among officers who complete high attrition programs are consistently higher than among officers who entered through less demanding pipelines. The military has documented this across multiple branches and programs. Officers who voluntarily completed the hardest available training pathways are significantly more likely to remain in service longer, to achieve higher ranks, and to be evaluated as highly effective by their subordinates and superiors. This is not a coincidence. It is the whole point. The programs are not just finding the people who can handle the hardest training. They are finding the people who have the specific internal structure that makes for durable, effective military leadership over a long career. The dropout rate is not a sign that the program is losing. The graduation rate is proof that the program is finding exactly what it was designed to find. Now let's talk about what happens after, because the story of what these programs do to people does not end at graduation. In many ways, the most interesting chapter begins the day they leave the training environment and walk into the real leadership world with everything they just learned about themselves. The newly commissioned or newly badged officer walks into their first unit, carrying something invisible but unmistakable. The people around them sense it. Enlisted personnel, who are often extraordinarily good at reading officers quickly, recognize within days whether the person standing in front of them has been genuinely tested. Not because of the tab or the badge or the school certificate on the wall, because of how the officer carries themselves, how they respond to a problem that comes up at 2 o'clock in the morning, how they handle a situation where they clearly do not know the right answer but need to make a decision anyway, how they treat the most junior person in the room when the most senior person is not watching. The officers who have been through high attrition training programs generally handle all of those situations differently than officers who have not. Not because they are smarter or more technically competent, because they have already been in situations that were worse, and they already know how they respond. They are not in brand new emotional territory when things get hard. They have been to that territory before. They know the landmarks, and that familiarity with genuine difficulty translates into a form of calm under pressure that the people around them learn to rely on. The subordinates of these officers often describe the same thing in their own words. He does not panic. She does not get rattled. They do not know how to explain it exactly, but they know the difference between a leader who is performing composure and a leader who genuinely has it. The leaders who come out of the hardest training programs have usually stopped performing composure. They have built it into who they actually are. There is a final dimension of this story that deserves time, and that is the question of who these programs are actually designed for in the long arc of what the military does and why it matters. The modern military operates in an environment that is more complex, more ambiguous, and more demanding than at almost any previous point in its history. The nature of the conflicts and challenges that military officers face today involves not just physical courage and tactical skill, but cultural intelligence, strategic thinking, coalition management, media awareness, legal constraint, and a kind of moral clarity that must survive enormous pressure without bending. The officer produced by the hardest training programs is not just a tough person. They are ideally a person whose toughness has been directed toward developing the full range of capabilities that genuine modern military leadership requires. The programs are evolving to reflect this. While the core of sustained pressure, peer evaluation, and voluntary attrition remains central, many of today's highest-performing officer development programs have added dimensions that explicitly develop the cognitive and ethical frameworks that physical toughness alone does not produce. Scenario-based ethics discussions conducted at extreme exhaustion levels, specifically because the instructors want to know what a candidate's moral reasoning looks like when their defenses are down. Leadership reflection exercises scheduled immediately after the most demanding physical evolutions, specifically because the transition from physical crisis to reflective analysis is exactly what operational leadership requires. Team dynamics debriefs that force candidates to articulate what worked and what failed in the most honest possible terms, specifically because self-awareness is a prerequisite for improvement, and improvement is a prerequisite for effective leadership. The programs that produce the most consistently excellent officers are the ones that have figured out how to use the physical and psychological pressure as a delivery mechanism for a deeper set of lessons. Not just, can you survive this, but what did you learn about yourself when you did? Not just did you lead effectively in that scenario, but why did you make the specific decisions you made? What would you do differently? And what does your answer to that question tell you about how you are going to lead the people who are counting on you? The military school, where more than half the candidates quit, is not a broken institution. It is not a machine designed to destroy people or to prove a point. It is one of the most carefully designed evaluation and development systems that any human institution has ever created, refined over generations of experience, shaped by the hard lessons of what happens when unqualified leaders are put in command of other people's lives, and maintained with absolute fidelity to a standard that has a very specific and very serious purpose. The candidates who walk through those gates every cycle and choose to leave have still been through something real, something that tells them something true about themselves. And that truth, whatever direction it points, is worth knowing. The candidates who walk out the other side, having chosen to stay at every moment when leaving was available and understandable, carry something that cannot be bought, cannot be faked, and cannot be taught in a classroom. They carry the knowledge of themselves under genuine pressure. And the military and the country and the people they will lead are counting on that knowledge to be real. The ones who made it look back, and they all say the same thing in different words. There were moments when I did not know if I could continue, and I found out that I could. And that is the one discovery that changes everything. If you respect what it costs to earn the things that are actually worth having, hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The people who go through what we have talked about today deserve to have their story told, and there is so much more to tell.